also be a discussion on the available funding for K-12 and higher education as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Kiana will be highlighting new appropriations and provide tips to meet ongoing technology needs. Just as a reminder, if you would like to see the screen of the presenter larger, you can always click on the plus sign down at the bottom that says Stage Zoom, or you can click on the plus sign in the top right-hand corner of any screen, and it will blow it up and make it bigger for you. So again, we are so happy that you are here with us. And Kiana, thank you so much for presenting at the SHI EDU Summit, and I'll let you take it away.
Of course. Thank you so much, Dr. Atkins. Hi there and welcome. I am so excited for today's session on education funding and grants. I see folks coming in the room. Brad, I saw you dancing earlier. Looking forward to dancing in person together next year. But again, my name is Kiana Romeo, and I am the Government Affairs Manager for SHI International's Government Affairs and Education Affairs Department. And I'm so glad that you can join us today. It's an exciting topic. I've had the opportunity to peek in and join some of the other sessions from yesterday and today. And it's really a nice time to be talking about funding and grants, because there's so many different things that have been mentioned in previous sessions that are potential ways to engage federal funding and or grants to make those bright ideas come to life. And so today we're going to be talking about a variety of K through 12 and higher education funding streams and opportunities for your organization to engage, seek, and hopefully utilize this funding to continue the important work that you have always been doing, but especially the work that you're doing right now in the times that we're living in as a result of COVID-19 in the education space. So here is our agenda for today. My goal is to provide a high-level federal funding overview, then take a deeper dive into the American Rescue Plan, and then really let you know about a great opportunity to connect directly with SHI through our public sector's grants program. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We are going to reserve some time later in this particular session to go over questions. And our goal is to provide you with answers to really help you be equipped to move forward with funding. And so here we go, federal funding overview. Okay, if you've been around over the last 14 to 15 months, you've seen several and multiple sources of pandemic relief and education funding focused on a variety of goals, right? Including digital equity and students returning safely to the learning environment. In March of 2020, the years are running together, we saw the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which you will hear me refer to during this session as the CARES Act. In December of last year, we saw the CRRSA, which is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Act. And then finally, and what we're going to really focus on today is the most recent wave of stimulus funding, and that is the American Rescue Plan Act, which provides a huge amount of funding for you to be able to equip your students, your teachers, as well as parents and communities with helping close some of these gaps directly related to digital equity and students returning safely to the learning environment. Next slide. Okay. So we know that we're fortunate enough in this particular session to have guests and stakeholders from K through 12 and higher education. And so I thought it'd be really important on the front end of today's presentation to really carve out the funding in this way to provide additional clarity. So here's a quick look at K through 12 funding that's been made available over the last year and a half. And it's not in chronological order, it's actually in monetary order. But if we start out with the CARES Act, there was almost $13 billion allocated to K through 12 students. That number grew exponentially through the CRRSA and then has continued to grow through the American Rescue Plan. And that ended up being 125 or 126 billion. And you'll see off to the left, the E-rate program, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, that was $7 billion. And we're definitely going to get into discussing that funding and how you can utilize it, because we have some information that's really been provided hot off the presses directly from USAC. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. When we look at higher education, COVID stimulus funding, the numbers again continue to grow from CARES of March of last year being $14 billion and then growing up to $23 billion for the CRRSA. And then now we have seen $40 billion come down in the American Rescue Plan. And, when we see those numbers, it looks like a huge blank check, but there are some requirements and things that we must do to ensure that we are spending this money responsibly, as well as meeting the needs of the students, whether they're, elementary or K through 12 or higher education, or what would be considered a non-traditional student. Also, there's some opportunity and some funding available for those students as well. All right. So moving along. Well, is it frozen on your end? Okay, there we go. So can you all see my slides? Katrina or Bria?
It looks like it's a Google page.
I'm not quite sure why.
I can re-add your PowerPoint for you. Just give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your patience. Maybe I'll dance a little while you wait.
Some of these things, I think, if it was in real life, like.
Well, I like to dance, so you turn on the music, I'm moving. Thank you, Bria.
No problem. It's uploading right now.
Okay. I see we have other dancers. I see you, Michael.
Doing a great job.
Thank you. Bria's saving the day.
Saving the day. There we go.
All righty. Okay, I'll skip along to the CARES Act because that's exactly where I was. Okay, back in business. Here we go. So as I was mentioning before, this is a high-level overview of the federal education funding that came directly from the CARES Act. We saw $13 billion from the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, almost $3 billion allocated for governors to use for emergency education relief, almost $14 billion for higher education relief, and then $153 million that was carved out for the Bureau of Indian Education. And we'll talk more about tribal connectivity and some of the ways to connect with this funding in those communities as well. All right, next high-level overview is from the CRRSA, and it just lists that $54 billion came down from what we refer to as ESSER, $3 billion for higher education relief, and then $4 billion from the Governor's Education Relief Fund. But this is what we're here to talk about today, the American Rescue Plan, right? We saw those numbers grow so much as demonstrated in previous slides. There was a total of $170 billion in funding specifically for education from the American Rescue Plan. That includes, more than $122 billion for state K through 12 education programs and $40 billion for higher education. We also mentioned earlier that $7.2 billion for the federal E-rate program, which is actually an extension to provide devices and connectivity to students, educators, as well as public libraries. And under this legislation, the governors also received $3 billion again to assist private schools, which is something that I'm really excited to talk to you about, especially if we have any private school educators or decision makers in the room, because there is a huge opportunity to engage, and that typically does not happen where you see federal funding coming down for private school and education. And so it's important to be aware when we're talking about the American Rescue Plan that these stimulus funds are not annual, right? They are a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. and they're a one-time funding source. And so as you're looking at, identifying projects, it's important to look at the funding and how much is available, but also what are some of the residual costs that may be associated with your projects and how to responsibly use ARP to fund those projects. What we've seen from the ARP is that the main goal is to really provide schools with the necessary resources to get back to in-person classrooms safely, which we've seen some schools do towards the end of the spring of this year. And of course, there's probably going to be a greater push for that going into the fall of 2021. But with this in mind, there is a broad range of costs that ARP funds can be used for, providing technology to close the gaps in learning loss that so many of our students have experienced directly. And we have educators that are trying to help students meet those academic needs. One interesting concept about ARP is that counseling and addressing the social emotional needs of students, as well as their academic needs, there's funding available for that. Also, personal protective equipment, cleaning costs, and things associated with trying to minimize the risk of virus transmission, especially as schools go back into session. There's some funding available for school facility improvements. Also, as I mentioned earlier, addressing learning loss. But, it's important to also note that 20% of this funding must be used for learning recovery. And that can be based on a variety of interventions. It could be summer school or summer enrichment, looking at extending those days, right? Comprehensive after school programs, or even in some cases, extending school year programs. And so, right now, my son's in a camp right now for NASA in STEM. And so I would not be surprised if the camp that he's at right now was partially funded through American Rescue or some type of stimulus funding. Next slide. All righty, so here we have it. The K through 12 Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund 3, which is the third one that we've seen. And so that's why it's titled the number 3. This fund actually provides $122 billion directly from the U.S. Department of Education. 20% of this has to go to learning loss, and there is a deadline of being able to use these funds by September 30th of 2024. It's important that when you're looking at these funding pools, that we're really considering how can we use these funds responsibly. And I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. And I believe the next slide will really give you some insight as to how you can do that. You can be using these funds for purchasing education technology, including hardware, software, and providing connectivity for students inside and outside of the classroom. Also, you can utilize these funds for mental health services and support, which is so important to pay attention to, because students have gone through a lot, in the last year or so, so have parents as well as educators. And so I think it's a really responsible stance to take when it comes to providing those mental health services. Also, schools are going to be going back into session. There's going to be some funding available to develop strategies to implement public health protocols, and those can vary from state to state. So there's not a one size fits all when it comes to utilizing these funds. It is going to be based on what's coming from the CDC, also what's coming directly from state leadership within a particular state, and then it flows down from the state to what is a board of county commissions or the school board, or whoever that governing body. What are those protocols that they're requiring you to put into place? What are some creative ways that we can utilize these funds to make that happen? There's also some availability for training and professional development for staff, sanitation, and overall just really trying to figure out how to minimize this disease from spreading. There is a huge opportunity to engage with organizations and schools and provide interventions for people that are considered racial and or ethnic minorities, students that have an economic disadvantage, because what we found through the research, and I'm talking to a room of very smart people, that those communities have been hit the hardest when it comes to learning loss associated with COVID-19. And there were issues prior to this pandemic even happening. There's also an opportunity to engage students with disabilities as well as English language learners and just anything that could be considered a minority of some sort, whether that's a migrant worker or a student, somebody who is experiencing homelessness. There's just a lot of creative ways to be able to reach out directly to your students. Do we have any questions yet, Katrina? I'm gonna take that
No questions yet.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna keep on going.
Somebody put in here, this particular funding is for public K-12, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is for public K-12, but there are some opportunities that we're going to go into a little bit later. This first one is going to be talking about higher education, but later we'll get into the funding available to governors directly for private K-12 education institutions. But that is correct. So thank you I want to ask if there's questions periodically just to make sure that people have the opportunity to kind of raise their hand and speak up a little bit. So next we'll get into the Higher Education Relief Fund. There's over $40 billion coming directly from the Department of Education to institutes of higher education. These costs must have been incurred from March 13, 2020, which was the date of declaration. So there can't be expenses that were basically prior to March 13th that would be eligible for reimbursement or use. It has to happen after there was a national emergency that was actually declared by the federal government. One thing that you really got to understand is there's a lot of things that you can do with this money, but there's some things you cannot. And at SHI, we're really focused on making sure that our customers and then we as responsible community members communicate the most effective and proper way to utilize these funds. And so I thought it'd be important to really cover the fact that you cannot use this fund or this money on like senior administrator salaries or bonuses, anything to do with stocks or buybacks, or basically any cash or other benefits to senior administrators or executives. And so that's really important to know because there have been some questions that have been asked, especially because people were really burning the midnight oil to ensure that there was a timely transition as a result of COVID-19. But it's just important to note that this particular bucket of money cannot be used in that regard. The deadline for this award is going to vary from state to state, but the funds can be obligated through September 30th of 2023. And it's important that if you have previously received funding, then you don't have to apply for this particular fund. But if you have not received funding for whatever reason, if your institution has not engaged, then you have till August 11th of 2021, which is this year, in order to be able to apply to be eligible to actually receive the higher education relief funds. When it comes to actual projects associated with what we refer to as HERF projects, it's really important to note that off the top, that's $40 billion. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's raining money. Like there's so many different projects that we can focus on. It's important to note that higher education institutions must allocate no less than 50% of that $40 billion or whatever was allocated to your particular organization to provide emergency financial aid grants to students. So that can be used to cover a variety of costs that were directly related to campus disruption due to COVID-19, including a cost of attendance or housing, technology, healthcare, and I think childcare is also included in that, but it must be prioritized for students that have an exceptional need. And typically, if you're in that space, that would be like your Pell Grant recipients. Those would be the ones that would be highly eligible for that first 50% that comes out at the top. At SHI, we're really focused in on providing the most up-to-date information to our customers. And so if you are curious about what your school was allocated, we can certainly help you with that. At the end of the slide, I'll be including a generic email address and I believe my actual work email address, and we can certainly connect with you and kind of let you know what your institute has actually received or is eligible to receive as a result of, Title I and other allocations. But of the remaining amount, there is opportunities to help defray any technology costs, providing training to your staff as well as your professors. Maintaining public health education is also an eligible opportunity for funding use, but then also student outreach. There was a mad dash. I knew a couple of folks that were actually in DC attending school from Florida, and there was a quick transition where these kids had to get back home because we didn't know really what was ahead of us over the last 14 months. And so any costs that have been associated with that disruption are eligible still for potential HERF projects. And as schools look at being able to bring and welcome students back onto campus, I'm so excited. I was able to look at some technology where there are apps available that can tell a student how many students are in what we used to refer to as the CAF, right? Or the cafeteria. I think I'm dating myself with that. But it's just important that students are aware of this, to make sure that they're not overcrowding or violating any social distancing issues. And so there's all types of things that are available to ensure that there's a safe transition back on campus, because we do anticipate that will be the main priority this upcoming fall, or even in some cases the upcoming summer sessions. All righty. So there was a question earlier, and that was not a planned question, about public school funding. And so this is something that I think is going to be of interest to non-public school stakeholders. It's the Government Emergency Education Relief to Non-Public Schools Fund. And basically, it's an opportunity for non-public schools, what we refer to as private schools, to receive funding to help offset some of those costs. And this comes directly from the Department of Education and goes to states. And the thing about this is that funding went to governors, for those governors to work directly with agencies to administer that funding. And there is a whole redistribution, or what we refer to as a re-granting process, to non-public schools. And the deadlines will vary from state to state, but it's important to note that the funds must be used and or obligated by September 30th of 2024. It's something that we had never really seen prior to the CARES Act, is federal funding coming down in this particular regard for private schools, partially because of the way private schools are run and how they're governed. But this money can really help schools prepare, regardless if they're public, or in this particular case, non-public schools, prepare for onboarding those schools and really the continuation of support to students that will need that. There is a focus, and something I have to call out is some of this funding allocation will be based on the percentage of low-income students that are actually enrolled in that school. And of course, there's opportunities for low-income students to enroll in higher education, non-public schools. And so this is a great way to be able to kind of provide wraparound service and support for those particular students. When we want to talk about, and we often get that question of, how can we use the funds? Tell me how. Well, this is how. The same thing, focusing on education technology, contact tracing, remote and or hybrid learning, as well as learning loss. Any materials or supplies or equipment that will be needed to move forward with public health protocols are also available for reimbursement, helping staff smart up on sanitation and how to use PPE, but also things like windows and air purification systems, really to make sure that whether it's a public or private school, that it's a healthy school, which I think is going to be the main focus, not only for students, but parents as well. And so we'll go on to the next one. All right, the Emergency Connectivity Fund. Oh my goodness. If you have not heard about this, I'm excited to be one of the first to share it with you. The Emergency Connectivity Fund, or ECF, is really to support eligible schools and libraries to purchase equipment for advanced telecommunications and information services. And really the thing to focus on with the ECF is that it's focusing on reimagining education. How are we going to prepare in the fall for students returning back? How do we present education in this new world to students? And I think the ECF is a really great way to engage. In order to use the ECF program, you have to be in elementary school, secondary school, or library. That does include tribal elementary schools and secondary schools as well. And oftentimes, any of the schools that are eligible for the FCC's E-rate program will also qualify for the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And literally hot off the presses yesterday, thanks to my director, Michael Lasolda, I was able to get some inside information that the FCC just announced that the ECF window will open in 2 weeks, which is on June 29th. And that's a question that we've been getting from our staff, our teammates, as well as our customers. And so we do have that date. And although they didn't specify an end date, we know it's going to be open for 45 days, which means it'll likely close around August the 13th. But don't wait till August the 13th to try to engage, because this is a funding that once it's gone, it is gone. But the cool thing about it is there's $8 billion that will help institutions or schools receive 100% reimbursement on costs associated with what is considered to be eligible equipment. So you may be saying to yourself, well, Kiana, what is the eligible equipment? Well, here it is. Wi-Fi hotspots, routers, modems, any devices that may combine a modem and a router, any connected devices. Those are things that you can actually receive funding for or reimbursement. And the reimbursement on connected devices will be capped at $400, whereas the reimbursement on hotspots will be capped at $250. And so we have a very smart group of people that are willing, ready, and able to help you with your E-rate questions. I love being able to meet with them on a weekly basis, and we're really just here to help equip your school with being able to ensure that we can go after these funds, because we don't anticipate this kind of funding being available, anytime in the near future. Alrighty, the tribal broadband program. We spoke about that, and at SHI we pride ourselves in being a diverse company and serving diverse customers. And so, really excited to be able to share with you the almost $1 billion in funding available for tribal broadband. It's through a connectivity program to really help improve the quality of life and help with economic development, particularly to Native American communities. These funds are available for tribal colleges and universities. And also there are some funds available to people that live in Alaska and Hawaii, depending on where you are. The deadline to submit will be September the 1st of 2021. But it's just really important that, when we're talking about funding, that we're being inclusive and sharing opportunities for all. There are a variety of projects that can be used for this particular batch of funding, including setting up affordable broadband programs, distance learning, telehealth, and any type of digital inclusion efforts are all eligible to be reimbursed under the Tribal Connectivity Program project. Any questions, Dr. Atkins, prior to me going into our public sector grants program?
Let's see, we have, if a school applied for PPP loan, are they eligible for the ECF?
Well, if you apply, it depends if you're a private school or not. And I'm glad you asked that question, because it's not necessarily the ECF, but under the GEAR program, the EANS program for private schools, there are specifications where if you're going to get that funding, you cannot apply for loans. And so for that particular person, I'd love to be able to kind of offline with you and figure out exactly what you applied for and what you got, so that we can map back directly to the type of funding that you still may be eligible for.
Great.
Okay.
I think that was our only question as of now.
Okay, great. All right. So this is my favorite part of the presentation, right? One of the things that I've mentioned is that this federal stimulus funding is kind of like a once in a lifetime deal, but we have this great program at SHI, the Public Sector Grants Program. And really, the great thing about grants is they were here prior to this federal funding and likely will be here after, unless there's a huge, change of thought in the way that the federal government does business and provides opportunities for education institutions. And so through our public sector grants program, we've been able to help a lot of our customers with many of the topics that have been discussed in the EDU Summit, focused really on continuity of learning and getting equipment and continuing education safely, whether that's distance, hybrid, or just full out safe campuses. In the K-12 space, we've seen a lot of emergency funding directly related to the digital divide. provide in STEM education. And so this grant program is an opportunity directly related to our partnership that started in 2019 with the Grants Office LLC. And what we do is we work directly with our customers free of charge, whether you're, a local, state, higher education, K through 12, private school, to really help you through the grants life cycle. It starts with connecting directly with your SHI account executive. And if you don't know who that is, I can certainly point you in that direction. You can just email the grants@shi.com email address. But what we do is we work very hard and diligently with our partners at the grants office to identify funding directly available for your particular school. And that can vary depending on where you're located, the type of funding that you're eligible for, the number of students that you may have. And we work directly to get develop a detailed, what we call a funding report. And I've seen it range from 40 to 80 pages with all the different types of grants that you may qualify for. And we work directly with you and or your grant staff or whomever, is eligible to help write that grant. And if you do not have people on your staff to do that, then we can certainly help you with it. And I'll talk a little bit more about the program, but a lot of times we get asked the questions, well, can you work with me? Here's a list of all the different types of higher education grant applicants that we've had over the last year or so. Nonprofit colleges and universities, community and technical colleges are eligible as well, research collaboratives, adult and workforce training providers, as well as any other type of higher education institutions. And so we work with a variety of actual customers that are looking for creative ways to be able to fund their projects. And, as I mentioned, federal funds won't be here forever, but grants will likely be around. And what our main focus is really to help you find funding, help answer questions, and I think most importantly, in an ongoing way, be here with you to help navigate through that grants landscape, and of course, helping answer questions regarding stimulus, etc. So there are a lot of different grant projects and opportunities that are available, a variety across the education spectrum. And our goal is to help no matter what your need is, whether that's connecting students, faculty, and staff off campus, readying your networks to return to campus, helping out with technology programs, softwares and devices, you name it, it's likely an opportunity to be funded by grants. And we are excited to be able to share that opportunity with you through the grants office, campus safety, there's opportunity in grants around graduation rates. And so what I love about grants is there are, of course, opportunities through federal funding, but there are even broader opportunities to receive funding directly through grants. And we're excited to be able to help you with that through the Government Education Affairs team. For those of you who are new to grants, and sometimes, and I think prior to COVID, there may not have been as high of an interest in grants as we're receiving right now, because we're constantly getting requests from customers to meet directly with them and talk about grants. But, if you can answer some of these basic questions, we can help you with figuring out how to get a grant going. Oftentimes grants are going to require an executive summary of some sort. What is your needs statement? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? What is the objective of that particular project? And if you have any idea, and we can work with you directly on trying to figure out what the proposed actual budget for your project would be. And then also, what is the impact of your project? If we were to fund project X, Y, and Z, well, what would be the expected results? And then lastly, from a sustainability process, how do we sustain this particular program or software? And those are the basic questions that we like to kind of ask during those consultative calls directly with our grants experts at the Grants LLC. Here is a sample outcome directly from Grants Office. It was at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We were able to help reduce the digital divide in the community, and that was prior to there being a huge push for schools to open back up. And there was a project where, we were able to add Wi-Fi hotspots to a library to really be able to assist providing internet access to our students who didn't have it at home. It was a safe environment, able to help people still be able to have the advantage of technology and access and be able to learn while still, engaging in distance learning. And so this is a very small example of what we are able to help identify grants for. All right, so you may be asking, well, how do I get started? I'll tell you how. This document is what we call an information collection tool. You can get that directly from your SHI account executive or anyone from the government affairs and education affairs team. And we just ask some of those basic questions like, what type of project are you interested in, how do you think you'll be able to use these funds? And then from there, that's when we get the document that's to the right, that's titled your project idea, but it's a comprehensive funding report. And typically what we'll do is we'll send you that funding report and then hop on a call. Depending on the type of organization you are, we have K through 12 experts, we have private school experts, higher education experts, and typically we'll jump on a call and kind of talk about your project, what you want to do, answer those detailed questions, and then figure out how to move forward. And that's a completely free service that's free of charge for SHI customers. There's no cost associated with being able to obtain this funding report. And we've had customers, ask for a funding report and meet with us and really, be able to discover some cool ways to be able to fund the projects that are near and dear to leadership's heart. And the great thing about the grants office is they've been in this business for over 20 years. And so it's a perfect match because SHI has been around for a long time and experienced in technology programs and software and projects. And then we just coupled with them. And it's just been really a match made in heaven directly for our customers. And so I believe that concludes my presentation. I'd love to be able to answer any additional questions.
Thank you so much, Kiana. This was just packed with information. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but what does somebody do if they have a question after this session ends?
Well, if you have a question after the session ends, this is my direct email address, Kiana_Romeo@shi.com. And, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can get you connected with your account executive. We can work on trying to achieve or gather the information for your funding report to really find out what types of projects you in your school may be eligible for. So I just say send an email or connect via LinkedIn. I'm always available.
Fantastic. So we actually have a question that just came in. For these grants or loans, are there any restrictions on the product? Can it be used for new and/or refurbished product?
Oh, that's a great question, John. So yeah, there's certainly, if the team doesn't know, grants are federally funded, right? And they come with their own set of rules and requirements. And so depending on the type of grant will delineate what types of products are eligible for reimbursement. And that's going to vary based on the hundreds of grants that are available. That's how that will go. So there will be restrictions on the types of products, services, or projects you can pursue based on the type of grant. But I'd say to that also, if you have a project, let's talk about it and let's try to find you a grant that would be eligible.
Fantastic. That was a great question. So I think we are, John said thank you. You are welcome.
You're welcome.
So I think we are at the end of our session, just a couple minutes early, but what's nice is that'll give everyone some time to go grab something to eat and get back for our Expo Hall hour. We will have all of the vendors open. There will be people at the booths to talk with you. So any questions that you need answered, they will be there from 1:15 to 2:15. So in order to get to the Expo Hall, you'll click on Go To, then SHI Complex, then Expo Hall, and that'll take you right there. At 2:15, we will reconvene for one of two sessions, either one presented by Apple or one presented by Google. So you'll be able to choose which one you'll want to go to this afternoon, and we hope to have everyone back. After that, we will have a choice of esports or professional development, and then we'll close out our day with Lenovo. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of our staff at any time, myself included. And thank you so much, Kiana. This was just amazing. You have so much knowledge around grants and funding, and just so happy you're a part of the team. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at the Expo Hall.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you.